Okay, Ryan, hi there. We are now live.
Hi, I'm Ryan with Glover Nursery, and since we're getting into our summer season, we're going to talk a little bit about watering your plants for the summer and also planting new plants and how to take care of those. One of the most consistent questions we get is about planting in the summer, um, which is fine to do. That's when I do it because that's when I have time. So,
It's true.
yeah. So it's fine. Yeah, it does get hot, but if you follow a few simple steps, you can do it. I mean, that's when a lot of landscapers they're planting all summer. So you'll find a lot of different information about it. But if you come to our nursery, the plants we have in containers that we have here, they're ready for sale any day of the week to go and be planted. Um, a lot of what information you'll look up is from trees being transplanted, which is a little bit different. We're talking about, you know, digging a tree or shrub up physically up out of the ground and transplanting it. Yes, there is certain times of year that that can only be done successfully. But when you're talking about containerized plants, B&B plants, sorry, that we've put in containers and held them and rooted them out, they can be planted. A couple things to keep in mind. When it gets warm, obviously it's better to plant early in the morning and the evening for you and for the plant.
Oh, we should give you some water.
I was eating almonds.
You
My
were eating
bad.
saltiness before we started.
Yeah, it's not a
Whoops.
good idea. Anyway, I'm okay.
Okay.
Um, one thing to consider is when you purchase your plants, take them home, water them when you get them home, and if you're not going to be planting them right away, put them in a part of your yard that's going to get afternoon north side, something that's going to be protected. Even if they're full sun plants, keep them in the shade because keeping a plant in a container and maintaining that is much more difficult than when they're planted in the ground. So the sooner you get it in the ground, it's actually better on the plant and easier to take care of. But until you can do that, just put them in a place where they'll get some protection from that afternoon sun just for ease of maintenance. So, and then one other thing we'd talk about too with watering is FTC, frequency, timing, and consistency. That's really important for plants whether in containers or in the ground. Frequency, that's knowing your plant, what you bought. If you bought, succulents, yuccas, things like that, obviously less frequency. Timing is critical. A lot of people, you water the plants when they need the water, not when you feel like watering them for the most part. So the timing of when you water them is very important for the health of the plant, for fungal issues. There's a lot of different reasons that you want to apply that water before the plant gets stressed when it needs it. So, I planted some stuff at my house. I'll water it in the morning before I leave for work. Some stuff does have a drip, but I'll still go out, eyeball it, see if it needs a little bit. If when it gets hotter, but you want to make sure you're getting that water on there. And then consistency is the key. It's setting reminders in your phone or whatever to go out and check and make sure that's just the plants are just getting that consistency in the watering. Like this tree here, we planted this last year. This has a drip on it, which is great, but drips fail. So you want to go check those, run your drips, walk around, eyeball and physically see that the water's coming out of there. If you have the inline drip emitters, like the tubes with the emitter space throughout the line, it's a little more difficult to see, especially if it's covered. But still a good idea to go out and check those things because drip systems or irrigation systems have failures, and so you want to check them regularly. You can see this still has the remaining dish that we put around it for deep soaking. So when you plant a new plant, tree or shrub specifically, we always recommend, leaving a dish around them so that you can lay the hose on there, turn it on a slow trickle, and let it water in there. Because when they're newly planted and the roots are in a confined space and deep, you want to get that water to slowly pool up and drain all the way down through that root ball. I call it thumb nozzling, to stand there with the hose and put your thumb on the end of it and spray it from 10, 15 feet away is basically useless. So unless you just want to wet an area a little bit, it really doesn't deliver the water where you need it onto those roots of the plant and down deep into the soil. So that's an important factor. And even with new shrubs and perennials, getting that water on there, you don't want to plant a dry root ball. If you take it out of the container and it feels dry, water a little bit before you plant it. You know, that way it gets a good watering. Is when you first planted, that good watering is really crucial. What we do is when we plant plants, we mix the soil however you want to mix it with your amendments and things like that. Put the soil around the root ball. You don't need to stamp and compact it. That, I know it's like kind of human nature to feel like that's the way to do it, but it's not really ideal. So you put the soil around it, take the hose, turn it on about a third of the way, you know, not enough pressure you're gonna like be spraying anything with it, but
like you don't want to wash the soil out of the hole.
Right. So what you're actually gonna do is take that hose and stick it down in that loose soil. So you kind of want to stick it in there until you find a spot where the water will just kind of sink down in there, and then you just leave it for a minute. You just watch it, and that water will be running in around that root ball, and then all of a sudden you'll see the soil start to fall in around itself, and then you can take your shovel, kind of gently push down on that soil, take the hose, move it to the other side of the root ball if it's a bigger plant, and then you use that water to really water the plant well, but also to settle that soil around there, so that you can get that plant firmly in place, especially if it's a tree, and then you can create your water dish. It's a good idea to put some mulch on top of that time to conserve water. You know, so that way you're kind of setting yourself up for success. But that first initial watering is really critical on how you settle that soil around the root ball.
And it's smart to do that way just because soil compaction can happen if you're stomping and jumping on soil to try and get things flat. You can also break the root ball. And if you break the root ball, that kills the plant, right?
Yeah, you want to be
like a
careful.
good gentle way to settle the roots.
Yeah, you want to be careful. I mean, there are issues with roots that you want to keep an eye on when you're planting. But yeah, I mean, even if you think about it, like if you've ever done any sort of compaction, putting in patios, pathways, anything like that, you only do that in a 2 or 3 inch lift, and that's even with a mechanical compactor. And then you do another lift. So you yourself just stepping and stomping on the dirt, yeah, you'll pack it hard in a few spots, but then you have loose spots, they'll be inconsistent.
Yeah.
And roots need air as much as they need oxygen. So you don't want to pack that soil in so hard just to keep the tree from blowing over or something.
Right.
So you're trying to get the soil settled in a consistent way is kind of what you're going for.
So I like your trick because it waters the root ball for a brand new planting, which helps a little bit with that initial shock, and B, settles the soil in an organic way so that it's like actually going to nestle around the root ball, and it gives you a chance to make sure your tree's straight.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is when, especially if you're planting a bigger tree, if you water the tree, the area like that, and the tree does lean to one side or whatever, makes it easier to fix it. You don't grab the trunk and wrench on it to straighten it out, or grab the top of the shrub and straighten it out. What you do is take your shovel, and on the side, say it's leaning to the one side, you can put your shovel on the one side, and you want to move it by the root ball, not the trunk, and pull on it, especially because once it's planted, especially if it's balled and burlap, you've removed the twine and things like that kind of secure that root ball together. So it's kind of in a vulnerable state. So you want to try to do as much adjustment with the root ball to straighten the tree, more so than pulling on the tree or the plant.
Thank you. That is so my fault. I got us off topic. I want to circle back to no, it's completely my fault. So I want to circle back to kind of talking about watering.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about planting, how to water, but let's talk a little bit more in depth about as it's heating up. What do you recommend for watering? You talked about the F, the T, and the C. Frequency. No, I already forgot.
That's what it is. Frequency, timing, and consistency.
Frequency, timing, consistency.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about like timing and consistency, especially, we're transitioning from 80 degrees to mid 90s in the next week.
Yeah.
What do you look for?
Like I said, the timing is just checking the plants and watering them. Typically, people are busy, so it's like you can just kind of have a set time that you go out there and do it, and getting the water to them before they get stressed. Because kind of what we see is not enough water at one point, and the plant gets stressed, and then way too much and overwater. So kind of avoiding that the plant, the little bit of decline, and then the overwatering on top of it to make it worse.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then in the heat, as long as you're planting the plants in the right spot, they can handle the temperatures really well because they're hardened off now. A lot of that new succulent growth that's really tender has beginning to harden off for the most part, so they can handle the temperatures better. I mean, plants are adaptable. They survive for a reason. So it's just a matter of applying that water at the right time. For the most part, you want to just try to apply it down at the root zone as much as you can, and early in the morning is best, especially if you're going to have sprinklers spraying the leaves and things. Even if you're using your lawn sprinklers to water some of your plants with, it's good for your lawn and for your plants to run them early in the morning, not late in the evening where it's going to sit on there overnight, and not in the afternoon where the water's just going to evaporate.
So is the sitting overnight so you don't want the water sitting overnight for fungal reasons?
Correct.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Especially sitting on the leaves and things like that. I mean,
yeah,
if that's all you can do, then it's better than nothing, but it's not ideal to let it sit on the plants overnight.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. And then I also wanted to have you talk about whether or not it's necessary to spray foliage.
No.
Because I see a lot of people thinking that that's going to help their tree, but it actually causes more damage, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it just makes people feel good to see the leaves wet, but
Okay.
it's really not. Plant takes the water in through the roots, so you're better off watering the roots. Like if our waters, if we see them just going there spraying all the leaves of the plants, that's not what we're looking for, especially because we're taking care of plants in containers.
Right.
So you're gonna, when you water, you'll spray the leaves a little bit. It's not a big deal, but spraying the leaves doesn't really do anything that I know of. I mean, there are some instances in nature, if I've watched documentaries on giant sequoias, taking in the moisture through their canopies, things like that. But for the most part, we avoid just spraying the leaves.
That's awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you another non-water related question because I think it actually is related. So can you just reiterate why planting depth is so important? Because we get a lot of people that plant things way too deep thinking it's somehow going to be better for the plant, but it isn't. So can you kind of share like how the planting depth kind of goes into play with the health of the plant?
Yeah, the planting depth is pretty well correlates with the oxygen roots need to grow. So what happens for root rot over watering is it's a lack of oxygen in the soil. So plants need that oxygen as much as they need the water. So planting it too deep creates that environment. And there's also other considerations, like a lot of trees are grafted. So it's kind of hard to see now here, but you have the lower deal there. So if you cover that rootstock up, then that union there, you're creating where there's going to be rot and failure in that graft union. So it's called the root flare. You want to find, if you get a container plant, they're pretty well established to where you want to plant it at the height that it is in the container or slightly higher, never any deeper. There's very few instances of plants that you want to plant deeper, and those are typically vegetables.
Yeah, like tomatoes are really well known for that.
And there are back in the day when, Grandpa was doing this, they were selling plants that you could do that with because they were ungrafted, like willows and things like that are just, basically really not big sellers today anymore because they're, they don't fit the landscapes anymore.
Yeah.
But nowadays with modern plants, planting depth is very, very important. Deeper doesn't help with anything. I think some people think it stabilizes the tree, gets the roots to go down deeper. It's just not true. The roots are going to stay for the most part in the top 2 to 3 feet of soil, no matter what, even for great big trees, because that's where they can get the water. That's where they can get the oxygen. They'll send other anchoring roots down deeper, but you're always going to have some roots in that top part of the soil. And then also for rot and problems, if you bury that trunk, it's just going to rot out. So yeah, I mean, you plant it at the same depth as a container or as the root ball, you're going to be good to go. If you are getting a balled and burlap tree, you do want to check, because sometimes that burlap gets wrapped up around there and it's hard to gauge the depth, or because those are dug mechanically. Sometimes when they're digging, it's typically wet when they're digging those trees. So the spades can kind of push up excess soil around the root flare. So when you take it off, you may want to pull back some of that soil to make sure you expose that right, just because of the mechanical process of digging. But containerized growing trees, you know, we try to stick with the best growers we can find, and typically they're planted at the correct depth so that you can just plant them directly in your yard.
Cool. I think next time we do a live, we'll talk a little bit more about the differences, like how much things have transitioned to container growing, and like how much more of a impact it's made in this, like being able to plant year round and all of that stuff, because it's a very different world now than it was 20 years ago, even 30 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So for watering, the FTC, say it again.
Frequency, timing, and consistency.
Frequency, timing,
So
and
if,
consistency.
if you're watering this tree and you have your hose on full blast and it's raging and splashing dirt out everywhere, that's not what we want. You want a nice gentle stream trickling, going down and soaking through that root ball, and that goes with all plants. So one great tool to have in your garden is a watering wand or watering can, so that you're not, even if you put your thumb on the end of it, it's just, especially if you're planting perennials, annuals, you can destroy a plant by water pressure. You don't realize it, but you can wreck a plant in one watering. So like putting the water on and putting it the correct way is very important.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, you had such a great saying earlier today. What was it? About the 10-year, you can grow a plant for 10 years, but it'll take you one day to ruin it.
Yeah, I mean, it takes years to produce plants, but a day to ruin it.
Yeah.
You know, and like that's, you know, we have that happen ourselves in the nursery where things get missed. It does happen. But you know, shrubs, trees, things that have taken anywhere from 1 to 10 years. Typically trees have a little more leeway, but you know, on a hot, windy day, even if you water it, but you don't water it at the right time of day, it's not necessarily dead, but leaves got to be stripped, got to be pruned, got to be flushed back out. Yeah, so like it, you know, it's called a nursery for a reason. You know, you got to take care of them.
Take good care of our babies.
Yeah.
All right, so check out our website. We have planting and watering instructions for new plants there for the first and second growing season. It's really important. And any other last minute things you want to share, Ryan?
Not trying to make it sound too hard. Still plant plants. It's not trying to like doom and gloom. It's not a big deal. It's just, you know, it's just a routine you get into, and then you know, it's amazing the plants that just kind of will come up and just start growing. Like my garden, I just went out there the other day. I hadn't really thought about it, you know, been taking care of it, and then all of a sudden a lot of stuff's coming up and going, and it's just like out of nowhere. So it's like, you know,
mine too looks amazing.
Yeah, so
and I had one other thing. Oh, and now, honestly, now is such an awesome time to plant trees for some summer shade. With these hotter temps coming in, let's get some shade on those lawns, and so you can enjoy them more.
Yeah, that's a big part of conserving water is having shade. And then, like Dad has always said, now is with the sun angle the time of year when you want the shade, which is a big factor because the sun angle changes throughout the year.
Right.
So you can actually go out in your yard and put that tree in the right spot to get the shade for June, July, and August. Because you don't really need a whole lot of shade in, you know, April and May. That's typically true. But you know, the hot part of the year is where you want that shade. Now you can see where if you plant that, where it's going to throw that shadow.
Awesome.
So that's important.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Yep.
We love listening to your brilliance.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good one.